Welcome to Dollars and Cents, Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Ramito from Private Vista. In this podcast, we draw from years of experience as well as guest specialists to help you create the life you imagine. Join us in this journey as we enlighten and empower you to align your lifestyle to help you achieve your goals with a clear picture of your future. Now, let's get to the show.
Hello and welcome to Dollars and Cents with your host, Nicole Ramito. Nicole, what's going on?
Hey, good morning, Eric. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm trying to quiet the little voices in my head we were talking about earlier because there's one that just keeps saying, eat the cheeseburger. Just eat the cheeseburger.
I must have its twin in my head. Although mine's always a double cheeseburger. So you're one step ahead of me as usual.
But then the other voice kick in and tell me to get bacon. So whatever. Anyway.
Oh, yeah. But then you get a side salad to balance it all out.
Oh, is that how that works?
It's how my plan works.
All right. Well, as much as we like to talk about lunch, you have a guest on the show today. I'm very excited about this. Who'd you bring on and what are you guys talking about?
Yeah, I'm super excited. My guest today in studio is Sarah Newcomb, and I'm really excited for our conversation because I believe she's going to add an outsider's perspective to what we mean by living your private Vista. We're going to discuss how to find meaning in your means, or in other words, how do you find your purpose once you have achieved financial independence?
Okay, fantastic. I'll be there one day.
Yes, you will. Just keep listening to our podcast. We'll get you there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nicole.
All right. So with that, I want to say welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Nicole. It's great to be here.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So before we start talking about, how to find purpose and meaning, I just want to give our listeners a brief background on you. So as I said, my guest today is Sarah Newcomb. She is a PhD, is a behavioral economist and founder of the Thrive Financial Empowerment Center, which I'm looking forward to also getting involved and being able to help out in that. But Sarah, through writing, speaking, and coaching, she teaches people of all stripes on how to build lives they love with the resources they have. And I think that's so important today with just all the messaging and everything we get, whether it's through social media or the media. So I'm really interested to have you share that with our listeners. Sarah is a subject matter expert, and she has worked with corporate behavioral science teams at Hello Wallet, Morningstar, and most recently, Edward Jones, where she helps their financial advisors understand and respond to the aspects of psychology that impact how people make their financial decisions. In all her roles, she aims to adapt the findings of academic research to practical use in the financial lives of ordinary people, and to ground innovative approaches for financial advice in well-established psychological theory. She has been quoted or referenced in a whole host of great financial journals such as Reuters, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Her Money, many, many other places. She's also the author of Loaded, which talks about how to get ahead without leaving your values behind. And I'd like to add on to that in connection with the launch or the release of her book, Loaded, she was also the featured speaker at Private Vista's inaugural International Women's Day breakfast. So I know at Private Vista, we're excited to have you back for additional conversations.
Yeah, I remember that breakfast. The thing I remember from it the most is there was a question I remember saying, there is no Spanx for savings.
And so many of our guests still mention that this day. So I think that's one that stuck with many of us there. And we were hoping that maybe, a few years later, perhaps have you found the Spanx for financial solutions? I'm hoping at least. No. So in addition to all the wonderful things you've done professionally, I know our listeners always enjoy learning about what our guests do outside of work. So maybe you want to share some of the things you enjoy doing on your personal time before we get started?
Sure. I am a nature lover. I live in New England and I spend a lot of time outside. I just enjoy finding little worlds, watching nature do its thing. I'm also a dog lover. So I spend a lot of time outside with my dogs.
Aw.
And a gardener. I really enjoy growing my own food, and I want to do that more and more because it is such a deeply rewarding activity to go out to your garden with a bowl and some scissors and come back with food.
I agree. I have a rooftop deck. I live in this city, but I at least grow herbs. And I know it just makes such a difference knowing you grew it. You can just go out and cut it, run your hands through it and have that delicious garden smell. So that's amazing. What has been your most rewarding crop that you've grown?
So last year, I mean, I always grow tomatoes, sugar snap peas, green beans. I love those because they just give and give and give. And just eating those fresh off the vine are fantastic. Last year, I grew potatoes for the first time.
Oh, interesting.
And that was so fun, growing potatoes, because
was it challenging? For some reason, I feel like that would be a hard
so
crop.
easy.
Okay.
You just bury chunks of potato, and it was so easy. But what's so great about them is when they're ready and the leaves turn a certain color, and then they're ready, and you pull up the plant, and the root system then has all these little potatoes hanging off of it, some big,
cool.
some little, some of the little tiny little fingerling kind of things. And so you get your little baby potatoes and you get your big potatoes, and you never know what you're going to pull up. You never know how many. So it's like a little treasure hunt. And then this year, my garden has many volunteer potato plants already that I didn't even sow.
I like that. They're very collaborative.
Yeah.
So well, that's amazing. So thanks for sharing that. I feel like for our listeners, all we do is talk about food, but we all got to eat, right?
The big part of life.
It is, yes. So with that, why don't we pivot from how do you find meaning in growing, growing your multitude of collaborative potatoes to, as people are working either, with their advisor, or if they're working on their own, what are some of the things that you would like to share for our listeners to think about on how do you find purpose and meaning? I know your tagline, which I love, is finding meaning in the means. And I know what Private Vista, we're trying to say, like, how do you find, we call it finding your private Vista, because we know it's so much more than just the dollars and cents. So why don't we start off with a little bit of background on that and how you approach it?
Yeah, well, so many ideas just flood immediately. But I think the first thing is that we have to talk about really is the trap that so many of us fall into when we try to establish what our life goals are. And that is the trap of social comparison.
Yes. Don't they say comparison is the thief of joy?
Yes, and it absolutely is. And yet it is an innate and evolutionary trait that we all have. We can't avoid comparison. And so this is an aspect of psychology that I think is really pertinent to financial management that we don't talk about openly because people don't like to admit that they're keeping up with some Joneses somewhere. But most of us are. I've done research on this and asked people anonymously, when they compare themselves to others financially, who do they tend to compare themselves to, whether they, are looking up the socioeconomic ladder or down. And not surprisingly, in every single income group, people tend to look up the ladder to compare themselves.
Right.
But then I also asked the same people, the emotional experiences they were having with respect to their own financial situation. And, how often were they feeling things like pride and contentment and joy and satisfaction? Or how often were they feeling things like helplessness and anger and sadness and anxiety, shame? So in looking at those two things together, being able to see that in every single income group, the people who were looking up the socioeconomic ladder, surprise, surprise, felt pretty bad about their own financial situation.
Makes sense.
The people who looked down the socioeconomic ladder felt pretty good. So you'd think the takeaway from this is be grateful for what you have. Always think about the people who are less fortunate than you. And yes, I think that there's something to that. But If that advice was going to work, it would have worked by now for all of us. That's one of those age-old things. Yes, of course, we need to be grateful for what we have. I think the problem is the fact that it goes deeper than that. It's not just about being grateful. What it really is about is what psychologists talk about. We call it self-comparison theory, pretty self-explanatory. But what researchers have found over decades of work in this area is that we always want to know sort of how we're doing at this life thing, right? We want to get a sense of, are we doing okay? And if we don't have an objective measure for that, then we will find someone that we consider a similar other and compare ourselves to them. And so that's where this social comparison of our financial situation comes in. However, if the people that you're choosing to compare yourself to you think that they have a better situation than you do, then you're actually setting yourself up to feel bad. Because I think in researching this, because I got really curious about this a couple of years ago, in researching it, I found that there are two really distinct kinds of comparison that we can make. One is evaluative, and that asks the question, how am I doing now?
Okay.
And so if you think about it, it's
how am I doing now compared to whoever you're choosing to compare yourself to, or
exactly.
how you were like 5 years ago?
No, well, so I asked people, like, when they compare themselves, are you comparing yourself to your neighbors, your friends, your and most people it's like friends and neighbors and colleagues.
Sure.
It's not themselves at a past time of life. I did offer that as an option.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so for some people they did, but the point was that this evaluative comparison it asks the question, how am I doing right now? So if you have chosen someone to compare yourself to someone that you think is doing better than you, and then you ask the question, how am I doing compared to them right now? You have set yourself up to feel bad.
Yeah, not good.
Right? Simple equation. However, there's a different kind of comparison, which is it's not an evaluative comparison. It's an aspirational comparison. And that asks the question, can I be like them in the future? Can I get to where they are from where I'm at now? That's a different question. That was really interesting because in this research study that I did, one group of people really stood out and really bucked the trend. And they were the small group of people who compared themselves to a financial mentor or role model. And
go on. I'm interested in this. So
what's really interesting about that, most people, I did some follow-up work. Most people don't have a financial mentor or role model, first of all.
Yep.
Or they
it's still such a taboo subject, right? You don't.
Well, and we don't share our finances with each other. So it's really hard to actually have, a role model to follow in their footsteps. But you don't even, just to look up to someone financially, you don't actually have to know their situation. You just kind of look up to what it seems. What are the things about their situation,
like
that
maybe that you
admire.
Think they have good habits, right?
Exactly.
They talk about, I use credit cards, but it's just to get the points. And of course we pay it off in full every month. And they might say, like, I jumpstart my savings for whatever goal it is. I always, we always save half of our net bonus, or right. It could be things like that. They're not talking numbers, but it might be habits they're sharing.
Exactly. And that's the thing to focus on. So when it comes to role models and mentors, I did a little follow-up work and asked people about, like, who they admire, what do they admire about them? And generally people were not admiring of other people's,
like, their things. It wasn't the car.
It wasn't that, oh, this person lives a lavish lifestyle. It was generally they were admiring of the person's contentment.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what we really want, right? We want contentment. And so the people that a good financial role model is someone who has managed to feel the way you would like to feel in your relationship with money. And so someone who never seems stressed about money.
Right. Who, secure, confident.
Yes, secure, confident, has good self-control, whatever it is. So that kind of comparison is extremely different from evaluative comparison, because when you choose someone to be a role model or mentor, you don't ask yourself, am I like them today? How do I measure up to them today? You're asking, can I follow in their footsteps? What are they doing? What did they do to get to where they are that I could do, that I could learn how to do? And so it's a kind of comparison that I think we need to cultivate when it comes to money, to find a financial role model. And you don't even need to, like I said, you don't need to look at their books. You look at their habits. You look at their behavior, you look at their peace of mind, and you can choose really simple, small things that you could do to be just a little bit more like that over time. And that helps, I think, more than the just be grateful for what you have advice, because the reality is that we sort of psychologically need to compare ourselves because we have this need to know how we're doing.
Right.
And so we have to compare ourselves to someone. So if we're going to compare ourselves to someone financially, it's healthier to choose a financial role model and compare yourself to them.
I agree. And one thing I would love to get your thoughts on is I feel like a big part of the programming for our society, at least in the US, is it's almost like it's not okay to be content. Like you always need to be striving or moving towards what's next. Great, I'm financially independent. Now what's next? I need to start a charity to give back, or I need to mentor young children, or I'm going to consult for free at this school. So it's interesting, like, how do you pair that with being aspirational? Mm-hmm. And I know I don't want to say guilty of this, but even with clients, I'll be like, there is no there. Because even for me personally, I'll be like, oh, I'm partner at my firm now. I'm like, okay, great. What can I do next? Right. So I feel like even myself, I'm into that programming. Like I should be doing more. I don't want to say tread water, but it's like, oh, I got to where I wanted to be and now that's good. And I'm cool to be content. So how do you kind of marry those two? Right.
Yeah. So this is, it's a great one of the eternal questions, right? But I do think we have some clues. And some of it really is our culture right. To strive, our culture
hustle.
is to hustle. And it is innately against human well-being to hustle.
Agreed.
All the time.
I know.
You know, I mean, I could say so many things on that, but I think what really, really helps is to get a very clear picture of what the good life looks like to you.
Right.
What does it look and feel like to you? And this, I think, is something that is really, really challenging for young people, not just because it's hard for them to look into the future, but I think this is an easier question for people to answer who've been through an existential crisis or two. Or four.
Which we haven't had any of those lately.
Right. But, being on the other side of midlife crisis age, I think there is the way that I think about midlife crises or midlife transformations, as I like to call them, is it's this general time of life, and it can happen at any time of life. And many times it happens for us several times, but it's sort of this awakening to the idea that doing things by other people's rules does not lead us to the satisfaction and joy that we were told it would. And so we have to shed the rules of others. And there comes a point where you say, the only rules that matter for my life are the rules that I make for my life. And it's when you get to that point where you start to feel your mortality that you start to say, I only have this one life and I need to live it according to my ideals. And that is a beautiful thing that happens, because then you can start to say, well, what is the good life for me?
I'm going to add on there, because I know you're talking on kind of the emotional or, mental health side of things, but I do find that too, with our planning process, oftentimes new clients will come in and say, well, how are we doing compared to your other clients, who are in similar part of the life cycle, similar kind of means? And, we're always like, it doesn't really matter, because that's why we do your individual plan that based on what you're trying to do. The other people who are at your life cycle, their number one goal might be like, I want to work 5 more years and then I'm done. Right. So that's going to be a whole different set of goals versus if you're like, I could do my job as long as they'll have me, or for at least another 20 years. So I think we too get that comparative or evaluative comparison as well. And again, I think we're always trying to compare, but that's what we'll too. And I'd love to see, as you're talking about these midlife transitions or catalysts, is a lot of times we'll see clients who financially they're secure. So they've done it, but because they don't know what they're moving to, and I get it, it's really hard to pull the plug and say, well, how am I going to fill all this time if I'm not running my company or running my division or my kids are launched, right? How am I going to fill all that time? And that's what we have found. It's very hard for people to stop working because they don't know what they're moving towards. So what's their purpose? And I think it'd be interesting to get your take on that, right? So how are you finding your either your new community or plugging into your existing community in a different way? How are you filling yourself up?
Yeah. And I have a very practical exercise that people can do to try to take sort of a psychological inventory. Yeah. So this is rooted in how I help people create budgets that they can stick to, because I think budgeting in general is flawed with that whole wants.
I always call that the B word.
Yeah,
people
right.
just shut down as soon as you say that word.
Well, and there's reasons for that,
of course.
But a lot of it is that the way that most of us budget runs directly counter to the way that human motivation works.
Oh, and interesting. So share more on that, please.
Yeah. So budgeting becomes an exercise in how you have planned to feel deprived. And the reason for that is that if you've ever taken psychology, you would have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right.
Yes, that's the one thing I remember from my psychology 101, that and Pavlov's dogs.
Yes.
But go on.
So Maslow's hierarchy is a very, very well established, very, very useful framework about human motivation. It's also very misunderstood and misused.
Interesting.
I went back and read Maslow's original work to get at what he was really trying to say. And the thing is that a lot of people think of the hierarchy as the things at the bottom being your survival needs. And the big idea for anybody who hasn't taken psychology is that you can group human needs into 5 basic categories. So you've got sort of at the bottom of this hierarchy, survival needs like food, shelter, clothing, right? Actually, even shelter isn't really necessarily a survival need. Food, clothing, air, whatever. And then you've got your safety needs. So that would be your need to know that, shelter, your need to know that there's some level of stability, that you'll have food tomorrow as well as today.
Okay.
That your needs will be met, or that you are safe. Then you've got your connection needs, your social connections for love and belonging. Then your esteem needs for both self-respect and esteem and respect from others. And then at the top of the hierarchy is self-actualization, which is our need to seek out and master challenge, our need for spirituality and meaning and for purpose, right? And so the way that people think about this is because it's in a hierarchy where you've got these survival things at the bottom and purpose and meaning on top, people think that hierarchy means importance, but it doesn't. It's a hierarchy of what Maslow called prepotency, which just means that if you had none of your needs met at all, the most potent immediate needs would be the ones at the bottom.
Okay.
Survival needs. You would think about air before you thought about meaning.
Yep.
If you had none of your needs met at all.
Sure.
but
kind of focus at the matter at hand, right?
Right. That they're
air, I need food.
Pre-potent. They're the most immediate needs, right?
Okay.
But once those are met to some degree, they don't have to be completely fulfilled. Once they're met to some degree, then your other needs become more salient. So your need for safety. And so Maslow himself said, who am I to say that love is less important than vitamins? You know, that anything, it's not Maslow's hierarchy of wants. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the big idea is that these are things that we need in order to feel like we are truly thriving. So yes, we can live without love and belonging and meaning and purpose, but most of us that have lived without love and belonging and meaning and purpose don't enjoy that.
Right. You don't feel like you're living your best life, right.
You know, what is life if it lacks those things?
True.
And so when we budget, we often budget through this lens of wants and needs, where we are essentially saying, if it's not a survival need, it's just a want. It's not actually something you need. And so then people will cut out things that are quote unquote wants, but those expenses were strategies for meeting deep, fundamental human needs. And so when they cut the expense, they cut out their strategy for meeting their need, and they feel deprived. And so the idea here is that what you want to do is you want to take Maslow's hierarchy. And this is when you're creating a budget, but let's go back to your idea of someone who has plenty of means. You've established, you know, your financial well-being is set for the rest of your life. There's pretty much nothing you can do to mess that up. You are fine.
Yep.
Now what you're looking for is, what do I do now?
Mm-hmm.
How do I use these assets to support my well-being? So you have to define, what does my well-being look like? And I think Maslow is a really great way to start. So you go and you say, okay, let me start with my survival needs, and let me just write down all the ways that I currently meet my needs for survival. Some of those things have a price tag, some of them don't, right? But you know, then you do the same thing for safety. How are you currently meeting your needs for safety? So it might be by living in a gated community. It might be by, you know, with insurance policies.
Okay.
It might be through savings and investing. But once you've got that financial safety established, what we're really looking at now are your higher order needs. How do you meet your needs for connection, social connection, intimacy, belonging, all, you know, those, how, and when have you felt that way the most? When did your needs for belonging and connection feel the most satisfied? What was going on? What's the community situation that you've most thrived in?
Right. So for some people, it could be like, well, I feel physically secure because I'm in my gated community, or it could be, I feel physically secure because I have my immediate family around me, my grandparents, my parents, my adult children, or whoever kind of your social support system is, right? So that could be something that's not financial.
Well, yeah. So generally, if you've already established financial freedom, then your security and your safety and your survival needs, they're met. But if you're feeling like you don't have direction and purpose and meaning, and you want to start a new chapter, then looking at those three top tiers, saying, well, what about belonging? What about community? What about my sense of connection? Do I have the intimacy that I want in my life? Do I have the amount of solitude, intimacy with myself that I want in my life? And you just take stock of, like, I think one of the best ways to do it is to look backward and to say, with the life experience you have, when were the times that those needs really did get met, and what was going on? Because then you've got clues as to how to create and pursue the kind of community that really helps you thrive. How do you get your needs for belonging met? And that's going to look different for you than it will for your neighbor.
I agree. And I think that's a great question. And I'm going to take it a little more of a narrow scope, and kind of circling back where a lot of our clients have found their sense of belonging and validation and identity from what they've done for the last 30, 40 years, right?
Yes. And those relationships they had at work.
Because you spend most of your time at work, right?
Yes.
So if you're no longer in that work environment, I know I have found too, even I worked at a bank for the first 10 years of my life. And even once I left the bank, the people who were my close friends or circle there, when we weren't no longer in the day-to-day, kibitzing or, like, oh, this project or that person, or even just be like, how was your kids' play last night? The relationships really lost it was hard to sustain the intimacy of those relationships. So how could you, I love that you're saying, like, look back to say, when did you feel those needs were being met? But then how do you pivot to, well, gosh, 80% of it was at work and that's no longer in my life. So how do you counsel people?
Well,
like, what's the next step of that exercise?
So you might be able to say, okay, so it was at work, you were around people who had a shared vision or shared skills, or what was it about those particular people, that team that you liked? It was a group. What was it? The teamwork? Was it the chatting? Was it going to lunch? What was it? And there are ways, I know for some people, there's a sense of it's not even the belonging connectedness. It's another level up, because you want to do this for all the levels, right? You say, when did I feel my belonging needs were met? And then when have I felt that my esteem and respect needs were met? Another one that work provides for a lot of people, especially,
absolutely,
And if you're a wealth creator, then a lot of the respect and esteem that you have had in your life may have come from having that role of being the business, the head of industry or the business creator.
Right.
And then when you leave that role, that whole part of your identity may feel very isolated and very unacknowledged. And so in that sense, I think there's a lot to be said for things like volunteering with small business association groups to mentor other entrepreneurs, because then you're able to take your expertise, go into a community where you're giving back to the community in a way where you're able to take the things that, your rock star self.
Yep.
And continue pass that on. And now you've got a community of people who are looking to you directly for your expertise, and you're giving back, and you're around young, hungry people. And so a lot of, finding ways, volunteering doesn't always have to be what you traditionally think of as volunteering. It could be taking your particular business skills and going out there into the business community and helping offer that through mentorship or whatever else. It could be, people, hobbies keep people alive. They do.
Well, I mean, I've had people, more than one person, say, like, I love to golf and I love my grandkids, but that's not going to fill up all my free time. So
yeah.
So it could be also maybe new hobbies that you didn't have the time or maybe even the resources at that point in life, and now you do. So maybe you're like, right. I've always wanted to get my pilot's license, or
exactly. And so again, like going through Maslow's hierarchy and saying, what are some, when you think about, so we talked about belonging and esteem, which many of us get those needs met largely through our careers.
Right.
And
absolutely.
So you do need to come up with a plan for how are you going to continue to get those needs met. You may need to create or join a whole new community. I personally have found, for example, that the times that I have felt the most connected and the most tied into community that I love was in graduate school in this little college town. But academics, like graduate school, the energy of a university, and yoga, those are the intersection of that, like the yoga people and through graduate school, like that was, and people who love to have house parties and dance. So right? No, seriously,
I would like to be part of that community
that are always down to dance, and that adds a huge quality of life.
Oh my God. I just have to interject. I have a good friend who we do dance parties in her kitchen. So it's like so freeing and liberating.
It is. And so that's the thing, is like when you have that level of joy and happiness and belonging with your friends, you're not looking around saying, ooh,
No.
what am I missing in my life?
Right.
You know,
and you're also not comparing yourself to their dance moves because you're just
no,
all out of your head and having fun and being silly. It's so
yes.
liberating. So,
But
yeah.
so I've learned for myself, what I need is a small community of sort of magical weirdos who love yoga and ideas and the outdoors. And so
yes.
I've realized no matter where, my fiance and I are looking for our dream property. And what I've been able to, through these exercises of saying, what is my dream? I know that what I want is a little house with a big plot of land. I want fruit trees. I want to keep bees. I want a garden, and I need it to be close to a college town, because that's
excellent.
where I will be able to find the community where I will thrive.
That sounds amazing. Are you guys going to stay in Maine, do you think? Or
we're looking at like Western Mass, like the Berkshires or the Amherst area. He's in Western Vermont. So there are some little college towns around there, but but that area of the country where there's lots of universities and mountains and
lots of nature. Yes.
Lots of nature.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Well, Sarah, I could talk to you all week. I definitely would love to have you back on the podcast for another episode. Is there anything else you want to make sure to share with our listeners, either expanding on something we talked about before or just one other thought or idea you want to share?
Yeah, let me just say that if you want to work with this idea of going through Maslow's hierarchy and saying, what would a life look like where I would be thriving in all five areas? You've hit on it when you feel a release from the pressure to live like anyone else, where you see their belongings, you see their lifestyle, and you say, that's nice for you. I've got my dream and I love it.
That sounds amazing. You mentioned earlier that there's I don't know if quiz is the right word, but maybe like a survey or evaluation to see kind of where are you today, and like to help you figure out what parts you need to work on. Is that something that people get by working with you, or?
Yeah, we had developed something at Morningstar when I was there for a limited time. It's no longer available.
Okay.
But as I build, I've got a lot going on with consulting and speaking, but as I slowly start building more interactive content for my website, I'll be putting things like that, self-assessments that help you understand, from a number of different angles, which psychological concepts may be the most useful for you to explore in your own financial life. But that's still TBD. I would say maybe end of summer, there'll be something.
Okay. And if, where can our listeners, if any one of them either want to reach out to you or at least find your website so they can check back periodically to see what wonderful tools have become available, how can our listeners go about getting in touch with you?
So my website is thrive-financial.net, and my email, you can reach me at Sarah that's Sarah with an H, at thrive-financial.net. Or you can find me on LinkedIn, Sarah Newcomb, and or Twitter. I'm Finance Therapy. I'm more of a Twitter lurker, though. I don't really tweet very often.
Okay. And listeners, we'll have all of her contact info in the show notes as well. So with that, I do want to thank you again so much for sharing your time and your experience and your wisdom with me and our listeners. One question that I do ask all my guests, which I think you may have already hit upon, so I'm going to let you say, with your vision with your fiance, but I always ask my guests, where would you most like to live and why?
Yeah. So I want to live, I have a picture of this property. I want to live on a piece with several acres, a mixture of mature fruit trees and meadow, forest, pond in somewhere in rural New England, near a college town.
I love it. Hopefully I hope I'll be able to come and visit someday because
Yes.
it sounds fantastic. And I'll work for my keep. I'll help harvest. So
Okay, great.
but not the bees. I don't want to go by them. So, all right, great. Well, thanks again. I so appreciate you being here, and I'll look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you. I hope someone finds it useful.
This has been fantastic. I found it useful. I was just absolutely, it was a true epiphany when you were talking about how people look at other folks and they kind of desire what they have, but it's not the desire of the things or the stuff. It's the desire of how they feel, how they're secure. And I've just never thought of it from that perspective. So thank you so much. You've given to me, so now I'm going to give to you.
Oh,
fruit trees. If you have not, so we do talk about food a lot on this podcast, because here's why. Nicole, I'm going back to the food because breaking bread with somebody is one of the most relational things you can do. And that, I think, is where people feel most at peace, whether it's breaking bread with their family, their friends, new acquaintances, whatever it is. So I think food is a universal need in any Vista, any private Vista that you're in, that you create. It's got to have food with other people. So that's my little tirade on that. But
I love it.
The fruit trees. Here we go. Sarah, if you have not looked up and seen multiple fruit trees, they are mind-blowing. So in other words,
are these like grafted?
They're grafted. They're grafted. So yes. So a stone fruit tree, for instance, will grow peaches, plums, apricots, all on the same tree. And and you can have apple trees that have
that's so great. Yes, I have a Franken tree that's an apple with like 4 different types of apples, but I didn't know you could do the different stone fruits. I love that.
Yeah, and I know that you're talking up north, so you probably can't do the citrus, but there's multiple citrus trees. So you're growing lemons and oranges and grapefruit on the same tree.
That's amazing.
Like the apples, the apple ones, you can get the breeds of apples that will actually bloom at different parts of the year or different times of the year. So it's like your tree is blooming in different sections with different apples all the time.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, yeah, and then you get the different colored flowers on the same tree and all that. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
So,
yes, thank you. I didn't that is a gift. I appreciate that.
There we go. And I want to thank you both again for such a great podcast. But of course, our last thank you always goes to the listening audience. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the Dollars and Cents podcast with Nicole Romito. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Nicole comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. And we humbly ask that you share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, as this actually does help others find the show. Again, thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at Private Vista, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Dollars and Cents, Creating Your Fulfilled Life with Nicole Romito, sponsored by Private Vista. Visit our website at www.myprivatevista.com or give us a call at 312-831-4370. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Private Vista is a group comprised of investment professionals registered with Hightower Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Advisory services are offered through Hightower Advisors, LLC. This is not an offer to buy or sell securities. No investment process is free of risk, and there is no guarantee that the investment process or the investment opportunities referenced herein will be profitable. Past performance is neither indicative nor a guarantee of future results. The investment opportunities referenced herein may not be suitable for all investors. All data or other information referenced herein is from sources believed to be reliable. Any opinions, news, research, analyses, prices, or other data or information contained in this presentation is provided as general market commentary and does not constitute investment advice. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates make no representations or warranties expressed or implied as to the accuracy or completeness of the information or for statements or errors or omissions, or results obtained from the use of this information. Private Vista and Hightower Advisors, LLC assume no liability for action made or taken in reliance on or relating in any way to this information. The information is provided as of the date referenced. Such data and other information are subject to changes without notice. This was created for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of the authors and do not represent those of Hightower Advisors, LLC, or any of its affiliates.